In a world that often moves too fast to notice the quiet heroes, sometimes it takes a dog to remind us of what truly matters. Welcome to Vale Marks, a place where stories touch your soul. And today's video is one of those unforgettable journeys. This is not just about a dog, it's about resilience, healing, and the invisible threads of love that tie generations together. Watch this story until the very end. Every second holds a lesson, every scene a heartbeat. And if it moves you, like I believe it will, please subscribe. Your support helps me craft deeper, more meaningful stories for you. In a quiet corner of rural Oregon, nestled beneath whispering pines and a veil of lavender blossoms, lived a woman named Ellie. The townsfolk called her Miss Ellie, the kind widow who brought honey to the market every Saturday and spoke to her flowers as if they were old friends. But behind her gentle smile and weathered hands was a history few knew. Ellie had once been a field nurse during a war that changed her life forever. Her cottage sat on the edge of the forest, where the world felt slower and time didn't press so hard. There, surrounded by garden beds, she tended with precision. Ellie spent her days alone. The lavender bloomed each spring, just as it did the year her husband died. She never remarried. Some whispered it was out of grief, others thought it was out of loyalty. The truth was simpler. Her heart had been filled once, and once had been enough. Every night, as the sun dipped low and the world turned amber, Ellie would sit on her porch and hum the lullabies she once sang to wounded soldiers far from home. Her voice was soft, tinged with something that wasn't quite sadness, but certainly wasn't joy. She often wondered aloud, to no one but the wind, if the world remembered the kindness of those who left too soon. It was during one of those nights, thunderstorm thick in the air, rain tapping on her window panes, that Ellie heard the whimpering. At first she thought it was the wind, or perhaps a raccoon rummaging through the trash. But when she stepped outside, wrapped in her husband's old army coat, flashlight in hand, she saw him. Small, soaked to the bone, crouched behind a toppled trash bin, was a puppy, barely older than a few months. His fur clung to his skin, ribs showing with every shallow breath. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just looked up, wide-eyed and trembling, as if he was asking the world not to hurt him anymore. Ellie dropped to her knees in the mud, ignoring the cold that crept into her bones. "Well now," she whispered, holding out her hand slowly. "Where did you come from, sweetheart?" The pup sniffed cautiously. Then, whether out of exhaustion or trust, took a staggering step forward and collapsed into her lap. She carried him inside, wrapped him in towels, and warmed him by the fire. Through the night, she stayed beside him, feeding him small bits of broth, whispering nonsense stories like she used to on battlefields. When the pup finally opened his eyes again, she noticed something unusual, not fear, not desperation, hope, a flicker of it. And it reminded her of someone. She named him Ryder. The name had lived in her chest for decades, unspoken but never forgotten. Ryder had been a young soldier, brave, reckless, and full of life. He died saving Ellie and 5 others during a shell attack overseas. She had screamed his name when it happened, and it had echoed through every hospital tent she worked in since. Now, it belonged to a dog with soulful eyes and a quiet spirit. Ryder was different from any dog Ellie had known. He never barked without reason, never begged, never broke things. He followed her everywhere, not like a pet, but like a shadow, a guardian. In the mornings, he would wait outside the bedroom door, tail wagging gently as if to say, "We made it to another day." In the afternoons, he sat beside her while she pruned her lavender, his eyes scanning the horizon like he expected someone from long ago to return. Ellie often spoke to him, the way she once spoke to her late husband.
"Some say dogs don't understand words," she told him once, "but I think you understand silence better than most people understand shouting." Each evening they would sit on the porch together, watching the light shift in the sky. She told him stories of the war, of the love she once knew, of the friends she lost, and the ones she saved. Ryder would listen, his head resting on her knee, breathing in time with her stories.
At night, Ellie would hum again, only now it was for Ryder. He would curl at the foot of her bed, guarding dreams, both hers and his own. Seasons changed. Lavender bloomed and withered and bloomed again. Ryder grew stronger, his once thin frame now steady and lean, but Ellie aged too. Her steps slowed, her hands trembled a bit more, yet Ryder stayed close, always close, as if he knew time was pressing in. One particular evening, as the last of the day's sun poured across the porch, Ellie reached down and scratched behind Ryder's ears. She looked at him with a kind of warmth only years can give. "If one day," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the breeze, "you wake up and I'm not here, I want you to find someone like me. Someone who will love you with their whole heart. Can you promise me that?" Ryder looked up. There was no bark, no sound. Just the deep stillness of understanding. Ellie leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "You're not just a dog, you know. You're a soul with 4 legs." That night, Ryder didn't sleep at the foot of the bed. He curled beside her, head resting near her shoulder, listening to her breath as it slowed, steady and calm. The house, once filled with echoes of the past, now beat with a living rhythm. Outside, the wind stirred the lavender, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird sang. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had found each other. And sometimes, that's enough. It had been a quiet morning. The kind of morning where the wind barely stirred the lavender in Ellie's garden, and the only sound was the low hum of bees floating lazily from bloom to bloom. Ryder was curled up by Ellie's feet, his aging eyes half closed, ears flicking now and then at the hum of a passing insect. That garden was their sanctuary. A place of healing, of stories told and memories soothed. But that morning would be different. Ellie had been bending to clip a withered flower when she froze, her hand clutching her chest, the pruning shears dropping silently to the soil. Ryder barked sharply, sensing something wrong. He stood, tail stiff, whining. Ellie collapsed in the lavender bed, her breath shallow, eyes wide with fear. The ambulance arrived in a blur of noise and flashing lights. Ryder chased it, paws pounding against the pavement, his heart frantic. He didn't understand the sirens, the shouting, or the strangers lifting Ellie away. All he knew was that she was leaving, and he had to follow. He ran after the van until his legs gave out. His paws scraped raw on the road. But he couldn't keep up. Ellie was gone. Ryder waited by the gate that night. And the next, but Ellie didn't return. He wandered the streets, searching for her scent, looking for a familiar touch. A neighbor tried to coax him with food, but Ryder refused. The world had changed. It no longer had color or warmth. It was a blur of unfamiliar feet and locked doors. It wasn't long before animal control picked him up, tired and trembling in an alleyway. They said he was too old, too sad, not what families were looking for. He was taken to a shelter, then transferred to another. Weeks turned into months. A family adopted him briefly, but returned him when their children said he didn't play enough. Another tried, but said he cried too much at night. They didn't understand. Ryder wasn't broken. He was grieving. With each return, Ryder's spirit dulled. He ate less, moved slower.
Sometimes he would sit by the window of whatever temporary home he was in, staring into the distance, as if hoping to see the lavender garden again, or Ellie's silhouette by the porch. But that view never came. Back in the small white house with the purple flowers, Ellie had survived the stroke. But she was never the same. Her hands shook. Her voice had faded to whispers. Yet every day, she asked the same question. "Has Ryder come home yet?" She would sit for hours on the porch, her lap covered with a thin wool blanket, clutching Ryder's old scarf. It was worn and frayed, smelling faintly of lavender and something else, loyalty maybe, or the weight of unspoken goodbyes. "He's not just a dog," she told her neighbor once, voice cracking. "He's the last heartbeat I share this world with." She kept a photograph by her bedside, a faded image of her kneeling in the garden, Ryder beside her, mouth open in a gentle pant, eyes alert. That photo was the last thing she looked at every night. One chilly autumn evening, the inevitable came. Ellie passed quietly in her sleep, her fingers still curled around the scarf. The room was filled with the soft scent of dried flowers, and a stillness so complete it felt as if the house itself held its breath. But Ellie had not left without a plan. In the drawer of her nightstand, sealed in an envelope addressed with delicate, shaky handwriting, was a letter to her grandniece, Hannah. A girl she hadn't seen in years, now a young woman working in a veterinary clinic 2 towns away. The letter read, "If you ever find a pit bull with eyes like storm clouds, but a heart that remembers spring, that is Ryder. Take him in. Love him like I did, and let him remind you. Sometimes souls find each other more than once." Hannah read the letter through tears, feeling the ache of lost time. She remembered visits to Ellie's house as a child, especially that gentle dog who always seemed to know when she was sad. She remembered burying her face in his fur when her parents divorced. That dog had comforted her in silence, just like Ellie had. Now, years later, that same dog might still be out there, older, grayer, but carrying pieces of her childhood, of Ellie, of something unspoken yet familiar. She made a promise then, standing in the quiet room with the scent of lavender lingering in the air. "I'll find him, Aunt Ellie," she whispered. "I'll bring him home." Miles away, in another crowded shelter, Ryder lay in a cold kennel, his body thinner now, fur dulling. But when he heard a voice, gentle, female, calling his name, his ears perked. Something stirred deep inside, a memory perhaps, or the echo of Ellie's lullabies. The road to reunion was still far ahead. But in that moment the wind shifted, just slightly, as if the world itself had paused to remember a promise made in lavender and time. By the time Ryder found himself wandering alone in the outskirts of the sleepy town, the gray had begun to settle in around his muzzle. His steps were slower, more deliberate, like someone searching not for food or shelter, but for something far more elusive: belonging. He had grown lean from months of wandering, his once glossy coat matted from rain and time. The forest that bordered the town had become his world. Trees whispered in the wind above his head, and the crunch of dry leaves under his paws echoed like memories he couldn't quite hold on to. Ryder didn't know what he was searching for. He only knew he had lost it. At dusk, he'd often lie beneath a thick oak, his eyes half closed, his breathing soft, almost still. It was in these moments that memories flickered, Ellie's hand brushing his fur, her voice reading to him by the firelight, the scent of lavender from her garden. But those memories came like wind across water, visible, fleeting, and always slipping away. One rainy night, the wind howled through the pines and rain soaked the forest floor. Ryder followed a strange, sharp scent, something metallic,
something wrong. His ears pricked. A low groan cut through the storm. As he approached a ravine near the edge of the trail, he saw a figure on the ground, motionless but breathing. A man lay sprawled, his leg twisted unnaturally, face contorted in pain. Ryder padded closer, sniffing cautiously. The man stirred. "What the hell?" he rasped, squinting through the rain. It was Ben. Ben Carson had been a Marine. Decorated, respected, but after the war, the noise never left his head. He moved to a cabin in the woods to get away from everything. People, noise, guilt, especially guilt. He didn't need saving. Or so he thought. That night, Ryder curled beside him, blocking the wind with his body. When Ben woke, groggy from pain and cold, the dog was still there. "You again," Ben muttered, voice hoarse. "Thought I imagined you." Ryder didn't move, just watched with steady, unblinking eyes. It took Ben most of the next day to crawl back to his cabin, using a stick for support. Ryder followed, never ahead, never too close, just there. Ben didn't know why he opened the door and let the dog inside. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was because Ryder didn't ask for anything. The next few days were silent. Ryder rested near the fireplace. Ben tended to his leg, muttering curses at his own clumsiness. He didn't talk to the dog, not yet. He barely talked to himself. But at night, when the house was still and the ghost came knocking behind his closed eyelids, Ben would wake, drenched in sweat. One night, shaking and wide-eyed, he found Ryder lying by the door, watching him. "I had a dog once," Ben said into the dark. "Kilo, German Shepherd, smart as hell. Saved my life in Fallujah." Ryder didn't respond, just blinked slowly. Ben chuckled, a sound rusty from disuse. "You're not Kilo, but there's something in your eyes, man, like you've seen stuff too." The days passed. Ben started leaving scraps for Ryder. Then he began to talk, just a little, muttering about the weather, about his busted knee, about dreams that came too sharp and real. "I see their faces, you know. The ones I couldn't bring back," Ben said one morning, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "I stopped going to VA meetings. Couldn't take the silence in the room. Or the noise in my head." Ryder sat by the fire, tail gently thumping the wood floor. He didn't try to fix Ben, he just stayed. That was new. That mattered. Sometimes, Ben would catch himself petting Ryder's head without realizing. Other times, Ryder would nudge Ben's hand during a nightmare. A week later, Ben found himself tying a proper bandana around Ryder's neck, an old Marine Corps flag repurposed into something more personal. "You're not mine," Ben said, squinting at the dog. "But I think maybe I need you more than you need me." He started reading again, old war memoirs mostly, and he read aloud, just like Ellie once had, his voice gravelly but steady. Ryder would lie beside the rocking chair, head resting on Ben's boot, his breathing in sync with the man's quiet words. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted gold across the treetops, Ben sat on his porch and watched Ryder chase a squirrel, not with the speed of youth, but with the joy of something rediscovered. It made Ben smile. "You know," he said softly, "I think you've got ghosts too." He never asked where Ryder came from. He didn't need to. He could tell the dog had known love and loss. The same language lived behind both their eyes. Two broken soldiers, one with a uniform and one with fur, keeping each other company in a world that often forgets both. And so, in the quiet of a cabin tucked deep in the woods, Ryder began to remember what it meant to belong. And Ben began to feel, after years of silence, that maybe he hadn't been left behind after all. Not entirely. The rain had stopped by morning. but the mist still clung to the branches like forgotten memories. Ben sat on the makeshift bench outside his old cabin, sipping black coffee from a chipped metal mug. Ryder lay nearby, curled at the foot of the steps, his fur mottled with age, his breathing slow but steady. The bond between them had grown quiet and deep, like old soldiers who didn't need words to understand pain. That morning, something shifted. As Ben reached down to scratch the dog's neck, his fingers caught on a small patch of worn leather just beneath the thick fur. Curious, he leaned in, gently brushing aside the hair. There it was, a weathered tag barely hanging on, the lettering faded but still readable under the morning light. "Ryder," Ben whispered. "Belonged to Ellie." He froze. His heart thudded once, then again, louder. Ellie. That name clawed at something in the back of his mind. Ben stood up, the mug falling into the grass unnoticed. Inside, he rummaged through his old laptop, muttering to himself. Minutes turned to hours as he dug through news articles, veterans' networks, even obituaries. And then there she was, Ellie Morris, former Army field nurse, deceased nearly 1 year ago, survived by one relative, Hannah Morris, her god-granddaughter, who had recently moved into the neighboring town of Cedar Hollow. Ben exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting back toward the dog, now resting beside the fire. "You've been looking for home," he murmured. "All this time." He knelt beside Ryder, running a hand gently over his aging frame. "You don't belong here with me, do you, soldier? You've got unfinished business." Ryder lifted his head, ears twitching slightly. There was something knowing in his eyes, like he understood every word. That night, Ben didn't sleep. Memories of his own wartime dog, a Belgian Malinois named Duke, haunted his thoughts. The way Duke had saved his life during a sandstorm ambush, the last thing he saw before the blast took his hearing in one ear. That same look was in Ryder's eyes, a longing, not for purpose, but for closure. By dawn, the fog had lifted. Ben opened the cabin door to find Ryder sitting silently at the edge of the clearing, facing the forest trail. He was ready. "I won't stop you," Ben said, stepping outside with a heavy heart. "But do me a favor. If you find her, or someone like her, let them know you made it." Ryder rose slowly, each step marked by age, but driven by something deeper, something sacred. And so, the journey began. The first few days were a quiet march through familiar woods. Ryder avoided roads, instinctively knowing that humans might not welcome a lone pit bull. His pace was slow but steady. Occasionally a falling leaf or a bird call would stop him in his tracks, triggering a flash, a rocking chair, a humming voice, the smell of tea brewing at sunset. Once, he passed an old garden fence tangled with vines. There, beneath the rubble, bloomed a lone stalk of lavender. Ryder paused, lowered his snout, and inhaled. The scent was faint, but it cracked something open inside him. He whimpered softly. That smell had once meant safety, love, and lullabies. Further down the trail, he encountered a group of children playing near a creek. They paused when they saw him. One boy threw a rock, the rest laughed nervously. Ryder didn't bark. He simply turned and continued walking. He had known joy with children once. The laughter of a boy who hugged too tightly and shared peanut butter sandwiches. But not today. Today, there was no time to remember joy. Not yet. One night, as rain returned, Ryder took shelter beneath an old chapel awning. The wind blew through a nearby wind chime, high and clear, and the melody brought Ellie's voice back in a whisper. "Find someone who will love you like I did." Ryder closed his eyes. He could almost feel her hand on his back, hear her voice telling bedtime stories about the war, not the violence,
but the courage, not the loss, but the resilience. The next morning, a truck rumbled by the road below, its engine rattling like the ambulance that once took Ellie away. Ryder stood still, his heart racing. That sound had marked the moment he'd been left behind. The trauma lived in his legs, in his ribs, in the way he flinched at sudden noise. But he pressed on. In the following days, Ryder grew weaker. The pads of his paws cracked from gravel. Hunger gnawed at his sides, and yet, something ancient, older than instinct, deeper than memory, kept him moving. He crossed 2 rivers, climbed a rocky ridge, and limped past the edge of a vast cornfield. Every so often, he would stop, close his eyes, and let the wind guide him. It was as if Ellie's spirit still whispered in every breeze, urging him forward. Finally, as dusk painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, he arrived at the outskirts of Cedar Hollow. There, nestled between oak trees, stood a modest white house with a swing on the porch and a line of purple flowers along the walkway. Ryder paused. His body trembled, not from cold, but from something like recognition. The scent of lavender was stronger here. A wind chime danced softly above the door, echoing the same notes from the chapel awning. He took one step closer, then another. Inside the house, Hannah was cleaning dishes, her hair tied back like Ellie used to do. She froze when she heard the faint chime, followed by a low whimper outside. Her heart skipped a beat. She stepped onto the porch and saw the dog, old, dusty, worn, but those eyes, she gasped. The letter her grandmother had left flashed through her memory. If you ever find a dog with eyes full of sorrow and silence, that's Ryder. Hug him like I once did. Tears welled up in her eyes. Ryder, she whispered. Ryder's ears perked. His tail gave one slow wag. And in that moment, the long, painful journey found its meaning. He was home. The morning sun rose over a stretch of farmland that had seen better days. Paint peeled off the wooden barn, and the fields were overgrown with weeds. But for Ryder, every scent on the wind was a story waiting to unfold. His steps were slower now. His joints ached, but his heart, the heart that had once known the warmth of Ellie's arms and the quiet strength of Ben's presence, was still stubbornly alive. As he followed the scent of hay and smoke, Ryder's ears pricked. Something was wrong. There was a faint crackling in the air, a scent that didn't belong, burning wood, sharp and bitter. He trotted closer, nose twitching. His eyes locked onto a run-down barn with smoke billowing through its roof slats. A weak cry pierced the wind. A child. Ryder's body stiffened with instinct. He barked, loud, fierce, urgent. His voice echoed across the empty fields, but no one came. Without hesitation, he raced to the side door of the barn. The flames were licking up the beams now, hungrily devouring the old dry wood. Through the swirling smoke, Ryder saw a little boy, no more than 6 years old, curled beneath a fallen plank. His tiny hands were scraped, his face streaked with tears and soot. Ryder lunged forward. The heat was unbearable, but he pushed through it. Flames nipped at his tail. A beam fell behind him with a thunderous crash, but he didn't flinch. With his teeth, he tugged at the boy's shirt. The boy whimpered but didn't resist. Ryder looped around, bracing himself, and with all his strength he dragged the child inch by inch through the smoke, coughing, wheezing. Outside, a passing driver had finally noticed the rising plume and stopped his truck. As he pulled out his phone, he caught a glimpse of the scene through his windshield. A dog, blackened with ash, leading a child out of a burning barn. He filmed it. By the time the fire department arrived, Ryder was curled around the boy, shielding him from the wind with his body. His right paw was burned, his leg trembling,
but his eyes were alert, focused, proud. Paramedics checked the boy, who was shaken but safe. Ryder was given water, a bandage, and kind words from strangers. Someone from the local animal shelter recognized him as the old pit bull who'd once lived in town years ago, passed through their facility, forgotten. That evening, the clip went live on the local news. It was less than 30 seconds long, a smoky, shaky video of a pit bull pulling a boy from the blaze. But it struck a chord. People began sharing it. Hero Dog, the headlines called him, a guardian angel in fur. Ryder, the stray no one wanted, was now a sensation. Miles away in a quiet living room, a woman in her 30s dropped her tea when the news report played on her TV. Hannah's heart pounded. She leaned in, eyes locked on the grainy footage. She hadn't seen that collar in years, but she knew it instantly. That worn leather band, with its hand-stitched tag, had hung by the back door of her grandmother's house for over a decade. It was as much a part of her memories as Ellie's lavender garden and the gentle creak of her porch swing. The video cut to a closer shot. Just before the screen faded out, the camera caught Ryder's eyes. And in those tired, soulful eyes, Hannah saw something ancient, familiar. A sadness she remembered from her childhood. A look she had only ever seen in two beings, Ellie in her final days, and Ryder. Hannah stood frozen for a moment. Then she rushed to her bookshelf, pulled down an old leather notebook, Ellie's journal, and opened it to the last page. A folded letter, yellowed with time, fell out. With trembling fingers, she opened it. If you ever see a dog with eyes like mine, Ellie had written, with a soul that feels heavier than his steps, that is Ryder. He is more than a dog. He is a keeper of hearts. He is part of me. Don't let him fade. Hannah sat down, overwhelmed. The pieces were all there. The collar, the eyes, the letter. The timing. She remembered visiting Ellie at the hospital shortly before she passed. Ellie had spoken of Ryder like a child. He's out there, sweet girl. Waiting. Don't let the world turn him to a ghost. Tears filled Hannah's eyes. All these years, she had assumed Ryder had found peace, maybe adopted by some kind family. She had no idea he had been lost, passed from home to home, forgotten, until he became a hero. And yet he had never stopped loving. Never stopped saving. In that moment, Hannah knew what she had to do. She picked up her phone, called the shelter listed in the news segment, and said, "That dog, his name is Ryder. I've been waiting for him my whole life." The animal shelter smelled like antiseptic and quiet worry. Hannah stood just beyond the double doors, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the letter Ellie had left behind. She hadn't read it again. Not yet. Somehow, her heart told her she'd know the right time. She had followed a whisper of hope, a shadow caught in a viral video clip, the curve of a worn leather collar, the tilt of a head she somehow recognized. Now, she was here. When Ryder was brought out by the shelter worker, the room seemed to still. His steps were slow, limping from the minor burns on his legs. His coat was ragged, graying in places, but it wasn't his body that told the story. It was his eyes. As soon as they met hers, those tired amber eyes widened. Recognition flickered like a flame catching wind. Ryder froze, took one breath, then another. And then, against every ache in his limbs, he stepped forward. And then he ran. "Ryder?" Hannah whispered, and fell to her knees. He reached her like a wave returning to shore after being lost at sea. His body trembled as he buried his face in her arms, pressing against her like he could melt into her warmth. Hannah let out a sob that shattered whatever walls were left in her chest. "I found you," she said, voice raw. "Oh God, I found you." People in the shelter watched silently, phones lowered, holding their own breath. It wasn't just a reunion. It was something holy, something born from the stitched-up threads of a story that refused to end in sorrow. Back at Ellie's home, now Hannah's, time folded in on itself. The scent of old lavender still clung faintly to the curtains. Ryder limped through the threshold as though it were a portal, each step soft, deliberate. In the living room, he paused. His nose twitched. He turned toward a worn blanket folded at the base of the couch, Ellie's old Afghan, the one she used to wrap him in during storms. He moved slowly, lowered himself onto it and sighed. Not a sigh of pain or age, but of arrival, of home. Hannah stood in the doorway, fingers pressed to her lips. Then, almost in a daze, she pulled the letter from her pocket. It was yellowed now. Faint folds where she'd read it too many times to count. She opened it again, this time aloud. "If you ever find a dog with eyes full of quiet storms and silent stories, it's Ryder. Don't keep him with your tears. Continue the love that saved me, not with mourning, but with movement. Love is not meant to be a memory. It's meant to ripple." Hannah looked over at Ryder. He was asleep, a soft snore rising with each breath, one paw twitching gently. She imagined he was dreaming, maybe of lavender gardens and war stories whispered under stars. Or maybe of Ellie. Her chest tightened, then cracked open with something unexpected, purpose. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the old desk Ellie had used for journaling and opened her laptop. She began researching therapy programs for veterans, elderly dog adoptions, and youth mental health outreach. It wasn't just Ellie's voice guiding her anymore. It was Ryder's presence. She felt it in the way he hovered near her when she paced, in the way he thumped his tail weakly when she smiled. She saw it in the comments flooding under the video of his heroic rescue, where strangers wrote about how much they cried, how much they needed to believe in goodness again. The next morning, Hannah filed paperwork to start a non-profit. She called it the Ryder Way. Its mission was simple: offer sanctuary for senior dogs who had nowhere left to go, and pair them with teens struggling with depression, anxiety, and loss. She believed in healing from both ends of the leash. She believed because she had seen it. In Ryder's loyalty, in Ellie's faith, and in her own heart, which was no longer heavy with grief, but beating with something fierce and gentle. News stations picked up the story. Ryder, the aging pit bull who once saved a boy from a fire, had now sparked a movement. Hannah never used him as a symbol. He was always a being first, not a mascot. He had agency, choice. He chose to come home. He chose to love, even when abandoned. And now he was choosing to rest, finally, knowing his journey had meant something. One day, months later, as Hannah watched a shy teenager curl up beside an old Labrador on the center's reading couch, she looked down at Ryder napping beside her. "You did that," she whispered. Ryder didn't wake, but his tail moved, once. The ripple continued. The lavender had just begun to bloom again, a soft sea of purple swaying gently in the morning breeze around the old garden Ellie once tended with so much care. Beneath its familiar shade, Ryder lay, his breathing calm, his eyes half closed but peaceful. Months had passed since he had found his way back home, Ellie's home, now Hannah's, and in that time, he had found rest, purpose, and a family once more. Hannah had built a gentle routine around him. Every morning, she would brew her coffee and sit beside him on the porch, where Ryder would rest his graying muzzle on her lap. Sometimes, she would read old journal entries from Ellie's war days, or letters Ellie had written and never sent. Ryder listened, eyes steady, ears twitching at the sound of Ellie's name, as if he still expected her to appear around the corner. But that morning, there was something different in the air. An unfamiliar quietness, not of absence, but of something coming to an end. Hannah sensed it when Ryder didn't rise to greet her. Instead, he simply looked at her with those soulful, ancient eyes and gave a soft sigh. She knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his, whispering, "It's okay, boy. You can rest now. You did everything, more than anyone could ever ask." As the wind danced through the lavender, Ryder took one last breath and slipped away. Not with struggle, not with pain, but with the kind of dignity and grace only a soul who had loved deeply could have. The small funeral was held under the same oak tree where Ellie used to hang the wind chimes. Hannah invited those who had come to love Ryder, neighbors, volunteers from the rescue center, children who had grown attached to the old dog's calm presence, and of course, Ben. Ben had returned to the town weeks earlier, after hearing about the work Hannah was doing through the Ryder Way. For him, coming back was not just about Ryder, but about reclaiming pieces of himself that he had long buried under silence and trauma. He now served as a volunteer counselor, helping veterans and youth process grief, fear, and the complicated emotions that no words could always name. At the service, Ben stood beside Ryder's resting place, holding his cap to his chest. He didn't speak at first. Then, with a hoarse voice that trembled like dry leaves in the wind, he said, "That dog, he didn't just rescue me. He reminded me what courage looked like, and more importantly, what trust felt like." He was a soldier in the body of a dog. Everyone around nodded. A few wept openly. Hannah had written a short piece for the local paper, and though her voice cracked as she read, she made it through every line. Ryder was not just a dog. He was Ellie's heartbeat, a living legacy of kindness and resilience. He wandered through abandonment and pain, yet never forgot how to love. He healed soldiers, rescued children, and found his way home through memory and scent alone. He reminded us that love, even in its quietest form, is never wasted. She paused, then continued with the last lines she had scribbled in her notebook just the night before. "Ryder is not gone. He is in the rustling leaves that stir when we speak of him. He is in the warmth of the sun that touches the porch in the early morning. He is in the heart of every broken soul who learns to believe again. He is the memory of the old, the hope of the young, and the bridge between loneliness and healing." The garden remained quiet after everyone had gone, except for the occasional chime of the wind bell and the distant laughter of children playing at the newly built center. The following weeks brought letters from strangers who had seen Ryder's story online. Veterans wrote about how his story gave them the courage to finally seek help. Parents of children battling depression sent thank you notes, telling Hannah that the center had given their kids something to look forward to, something real, something healing. One child, Max, had drawn a picture of Ryder with angel wings, standing beside a girl in army clothes. "This is Ryder and Miss Ellie," he had written in wobbly crayon letters. "They are together now." Hannah framed that picture and hung it above the front desk at the center. It was the first thing visitors saw when they walked in, and in the corner of the front lawn, she placed a carved wooden sign that read, "Welcome to the Ryder Way, where healing begins." Ben often said that Ryder had trained all of them in the art of quiet bravery. He didn't bark much, Ben would joke to the kids, but when he did, it meant something. One evening, as Hannah sat in the garden with a candle lit beside Ryder's memorial stone, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "You kept your promise. You found someone who loved you like she did." Somewhere in the quiet rustling of the lavender, In the slow hush of the wind, she felt it. The assurance that Ryder had not vanished, only returned to the place where love never dies. And in that place, both Ellie and Ryder were waiting, not as fading memories, but as eternal reminders that healing, no matter how slow, always finds its way home. As the final echoes of Ryder's pause steps fade beneath the lavender tree, we are left not with silence, but with a resonance that speaks louder than words. This wasn't just the story of a dog, it was the story of devotion beyond death, of a soldier's legacy carried in fur and heartbeat, and of a young woman who found herself by honoring a past she never fully knew. And maybe, just maybe, it's also your story, of someone who once needed saving, or someone still learning how to love without fear. Ryder may have left this world, but his legacy lives on in the Ryder way, in the laughter of healed children, in the strength of a veteran who finally slept without nightmares, and in every person who dares to believe that love doesn't end, it transforms. As Maya Angelou once wrote, "People will forget what you said, forget what you did, but never forget how you made them feel." If Ryder taught us anything, it's that presence, the kind that listens, protects, and stays even when unspoken, is the most powerful act of all. So if this story touched you, let it linger. Leave a comment below, tell me who your Ryder was, share this video with someone who needs a gentle reminder that hope still exists, and please subscribe to Vale Marks. With your support, I can keep bringing you stories that heal, stories that matter. Let this be more than a goodbye. Let it be a beginning. Because here at Vale Marks, we don't just tell stories, we honor the ones who live them. And as the old saying goes, those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day,